Welcome everyone to LG demonstration number 2. We'll today be looking at prep test 22, section 3, questions 20 through 24, otherwise remembered by many as the good old jugglers game. This one, I've got a couple of remarks on why it might be difficult, but let's not really spend too much time on that and get right into it. As always, a quick review of the actual process I'm going to follow. We always start with doing the setup, and during this phase, all we're doing is identifying the game type, looking for anything that amounts to a rule 0, and then drawing a base diagram. If we're having a hybrid situation, which we will in this particular game, we will use the hybrid diagram priority list to construct a multifaceted diagram. Next phase, after we've done the setup, we move into the rules. Our only tasks here are to visually translate the rules in a manner that make them reflect your diagram. And remember, we are not actively looking for deductions. This is not to say that they aren't there or that you might not see them easily, but I am not going to be expending any actual time and effort into looking for deductions that do not make themselves automatically obvious to me. After we've done the setup and the rules, we finally move into the questions. And the questions themselves we will be working in 3 stages. Stage 1 is to take any information the question stem gives us, inserting it into the diagram that we made from the setup phase, and then filling in anything that must be true based on that. And again, there could be lots of deductions that come from trying to work out a lot of stuff in stage 1, but just like the rules section, I am not actually going to be looking that hard for deductive or must be true information, just the things that are most obvious to me. And then I'm going to push right into stage 2 of question analysis, which is, after we've done stage 1, we are now in the business of trying to see the possibilities or what could be true. And again, the things to remember: do not draw more than 3 possible pictures. If there are too many possible pictures, or you can't draw even a single picture because it seems too up in the air, stop attempting to draw and instead focus on just getting a feel for how the rules and entities interact in whatever situation is you're looking at. After we have exhausted stages 1 and 2, we move into stage 3, and that is when we actually begin to test answer choices according to the table of power provided here. So diving right into the setup. The first challenge here is to identify the game type that we are looking at. If you take a look at the intro paragraph, and I'm going to find these and list these in the order that the paragraph verbally provides them to us, it looks like the first thing that we know we're doing is an in and out situation. We are told exactly 6 of the 7 jugglers are going to be assigned into whatever diagram we make. So that tells us that we're not using all 7 entities. We have to select 6 of them to be in and 1 of them to be out. The next thing that the paragraph reveals to us is that there is an ordering aspect to this. On top of picking out only 6 of the possible 7 jugglers, we have to figure out if they are in a front, middle, or rear position. And anytime there is an order or orientation to where we place, so if where we place an entity matters in terms of any kind of order or orientation, it's an ordering game. That's a pretty easy standard to follow. And finally, we get to the end where it looks like we have a grouping task, and it looks like the picture is kind of coming together. We are taking these 6 of 7 jugglers, putting them in a front, rear, and middle position, and grouping them into 2 teams. So really, I think this is the primary challenge. It would have made a lot more sense if they gave us the tasks in reverse order, telling us that we've got a pool of 7 jugglers. We are going to form 2 teams of 3 out of them. And then not only are we forming teams, within each team we have to determine who goes in what position. I think that would have made a lot more natural sense, and that's actually how our diagram works. But I think the fact that they went sort of in a reverse order is the first thing that throws off a lot of people about this game. But now that we've identified the 3 tasks, in and out, ordering, and grouping, the next thing I want to do before drawing my diagram is to look for a rule 0, and in this case, there's really nothing there that amounts to a rule 0. Stuff like exactly 6 of the 7 is going to be hard-coded into our diagram, so we don't have to worry about notating that separately. And so you'll see what I mean in a minute about the hard coding. So now that I've figured out what we're doing and that there is no real rule 0, I'm going to settle down and draw the baseline diagram. So in our hybrid priority list, of the 4 basic tasks that we have to do in general, grouping is the highest priority in the list. So for this game, because there is a grouping element, we will start there. And this is what our grouping looks like initially. Just a simple table, team 1 and team 2. Next, the next thing down on our priority list is the ordering aspect. So then we throw in ordering. And the easiest way to do that is to just draw 3 vertical lines, front, middle, or rear, or you can go left to right if that's how your paper space or just how your brain works. I'm just going to go a vertical format just because it's easier for me here. And you can label it front, middle, rear, FMR if you want, going down the side of the table, but eventually that's going to be unnecessary. So when you're actually doing this and you're reproducing your table quickly to try possibilities or whatnot, you probably don't need to actually label it. But I'll just leave that in here for clarity's sake. And finally, our third task in this game was the in and out part. But like I said, our picture hard codes exactly 6 slots, so that's already taken care of. We don't really need to worry about that. So that's that. We don't actually need to care. So now that we have successfully constructed our baseline diagram that incorporates all 3 of our tasks, we are now going to move into the rules. And again, our goal here is to visually translate the rules and make them reflect our diagram whenever possible. However, just for the sake of saving space here, and also maybe saving time on test day, rather than making it an exact visual representation, I think we can cop out here and use subscripts to define team 1 or the front, middle, or rear position on each of our entities, because front, middle, and rear, team 1, team 2, they aren't super hard concepts, and drawing out the table essentially, or smaller version of the table every single time, would take a lot of space here in my video, and also it would take a lot of space on your scratch paper, whatever surface you're using. So I think this is a situation where not having an exact visual representation is okay. That being said, if you want to, you can do it, but so long as you have the space for it. The nice thing, though, is just if you happen to do it the bigger, more space inefficient way, that is okay, because you're not really going to be drawing these rules out repeatedly. All you need to do is to do it once, and then you can refer back to it. So it's really up to you. For my purposes here, for the purposes of instruction, I'm just going to do it this way. So starting with rule number 1. This one tells us anytime we use a G, so if G shows up, G is in a front position. Same thing with H. If H shows up, H is in a front position. Rule number 2 tells us if we do use K, K is always in a middle position. Rule 3 tells us if L is used, L is always on team 1. No positional data, it just tells us team 1. Rule number 4. If we see a P or a K, we know that automatically means we will not see an N on that same team. Conversely, contrapositively, if we see an N on any team, that disqualifies us from using P and K. Both of those are kicked out of whatever team N is on. So basically, anytime you see P or K, you can't see an N in the same column. Anytime you see an N, you cannot see P or K in that same column. Rule 5, this may end up being a handy one, but because binary rules like this are always kind of handy. Anytime we see a P, we cannot also have a Q on that team, and the contrapositive, of course, means that if we do happen to see a Q somewhere, that also means that we're not seeing a P on that same team. I say the binary thing is handy simply because we have seen a lot of situations in a lot of different games, easy and hard alike, where this sort of breakdown can lead to 2 alternatives when you're testing possibilities. But that's just a guess. There's nothing worthy of drawing out or deducing further than that, just something to keep in mind as you go along. It may turn out to be completely useless. And finally, we get to rule number 6, where this is kind of interesting. If H is on team 2, that means Q is not only is Q on team 1, it is also in the middle position of team 1. So this is pretty exact. So far, all of our rules have just had either purely team information only or position information only. So rule 1 and rule 2 talk about entities and only give us position data on them, no team data. Rules like rule number 3, 4, and 5 are all about teams. Rule 3 tells us what team L is on, not what position it's on. Same thing as with rule 4 and rule 5. They tell us who can be on teams or not be on teams with each other, but it doesn't give positional data. Same thing with rule 5. It doesn't give us any relative positions of P and Q. All we know is that they cannot be on the same team. Rule 6 is the only one so far that gives us very exact information. Sure, we don't have, this one doesn't give us positional information, but actually we have that information for H already from rule 1, right? If H shows up on team 2, we know that it's not only on team 2, it has to be in a front slot, thanks to rule 1. And so if H is on team 2 in the front slot, then that means Q is on team 1 in the middle slot. That's very exact and very limiting. I get the feeling we will be dealing with this one in a useful manner repeatedly. So I am not going to actively look for any further deductions. Like I said, just note that when rule 6 is invoked, it gives us quite a bit of data. And a similar thing just to note is with N. N showing up kicks off both P and K, so that could be handy. So anything that is severely limiting to us in certain contexts is something to keep an eye out for, but I'm not going to push anything any further. Just keep that general awareness in mind. So now that we have done the setup and we've done the rules and skipped deductions, I want to emphasize again, we have not really done any deductions. We move right to our first question, which is question number 20. This one is a rule checker by all appearances until we look at the answer choices. So it is a rule checker, but the weird thing is that the answer choices only give us half of the diagram. Normally our diagram would have both team 1 and team 2 in it, right, if we're looking at a complete diagram. And a normal rule checker that we're used to in easier games would give us a complete diagram that reflects both teams. But because this one only gives us one of the teams, there's a chance that we need to see what's going on in the other team to confirm whether it works or not. But for the time being, since the question itself is structured as a regular rule checker, I'm going to see if we luck out and if the rules will eliminate even just these half pictures that these answer choices are given as. So starting right up with rule number 1 in usual rule checker fashion, rule 1 doesn't actually help us here, because in each of these answer choices, anytime G or H shows up, they're in the front slot, so rule 1 on its face doesn't get rid of anything. Rule 2 helps us out by eliminating B. In B, we see that we have a K, but it's not in the middle as the rule regarding K forces us to have. So since K isn't in the middle, but it's showing up, we're eliminating B. Rule 3 eliminates C. L is only allowed to show up on team 1, but it's listed here in team 2. You have to remember that all these answer choices reflect a potential composition of team 2. So if we see L in here, that's already automatically wrong because the rules tell us L is only allowed to be on team 1. Rule number 4 eliminates A. K isn't allowed to be on a team with N, but we have that here in A, so that's clearly out. And getting to rule number 5, that eliminates D. P isn't allowed to be on a team with Q, but this answer choice has them on the same team, so that actually works out for us. We have eliminated A, B, C, and D based on rules 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we didn't actually have to investigate what's going on with team 1. Just the regular rule checker procedure worked for us, and it leaves us with E as our answer. Pushing right along into question 21. This one proposes, if H is on team 2, what could be true about team 1? So let's look at what's going on here. We're just going to start with a normal stage 1 analysis. We're going to insert H being on team 2 and see what else comes of it. So again, rule 1 tells us if H does show up, it has to be in front. So incorporating the question statement information, H being on team 2, results in this diagram, where it's not only is it on team 2, but it is in the front position. Rule 6, though, as we kind of noticed in our rules setup phase, that has an interesting interplay here. We know that if H shows up in team 2 and is in the front position, then it means that Q is forced to be in team 1 and on the middle position. So I misspoke there. The actual rule itself is only if H is on team 2, but H is on team 2 according to the question here, so that still invokes rule 6. So this is our resulting diagram. I think for me that's all I see for the time being. We do know that P, as a result of Q being in team 1, can't go in team 1 because of rule 5, which prevents P and Q from sharing a team. But I can't really put that in. I can't find a very efficient way because I don't know. So P, if we use it, goes on team 2, but I don't know at this point if we have to use P or not, so there's really nothing for me to do. So I'm just going to leave the diagram as it is. And again, this is just all purely based on only the information that the question stem has given us, which is putting H in team 2. If we put H in team 2, rule 6 tells us the only way we could have pulled that off is if we have Q in the middle spot on team 1, so we have to have that in order to have a situation where H is on team 2 in the first place. So continuing on the same question, if H is on team 2, what could be true about team 1? We are now into stage 2 of our analysis. And here, just kind of looking at the open diagram that we had on the last slide, where all we have is H being on team 2 in the front slot and Q being on team 1 in the middle slot, to me it seems pretty open-ended at this point because I didn't do any deductions. And because there seem to be so many possibilities, I'm reticent to just trying out a bunch of possibilities because I get the feeling even if there are only 3 or 2, it's going to be a lot of drawing because this is a 2x3 table. It is kind of chunky as far as diagrams go. So I am not really enthusiastic about the prospect of drawing out repeated possibilities in this open-ended situation. So I'm not really going to do that. And I'm just going to go right into stage 3. That's my personal choice here. I do want to note that I could be totally wrong and that trying a couple things out may prove that our options are quite limited, but that's not really the point of me demonstrating my methodology here. I would personally, this early in the game, just move right into stage 3. That's an accurate representation of what I would personally do on testing. Just to reiterate, the whole point of my method is to get more answers with the least amount of pre-figuring things out, so that is exactly what I will do here. So having decided not to really pursue stage 2 and moving right into stage 3, I am going to choose to try quick eliminations. I don't really make a note of it on the slide here. I do talk about it on future questions, but my decision to also start to look at answer choices with eliminations in mind is based purely on the fact that I've done no stage 2 work and that things seemed so up in the air. So the less groundwork that I have done in stage 2, the more likely I am to want to search for easy eliminations just to save the amount of repeated diagram testing possibilities kind of work that I have to do for a purely stage 3 analysis. So what we know from stage 1, when we just first tried to set this question up, we knew that Q always has to go in the middle position on team 1. We got at least that much out of stage 1, right? Interestingly, though, if you look at our answer choices, that immediately eliminates A, B, and C, which do not put Q in the middle position on team 1. So again, the one thing that we figured out based on the question stem is that if we put H on team 2, that forces Q to be in the middle position on team 1, and we can get rid of 3 answer choices that already don't satisfy that condition. So we've got a lot of our work saved for us. We only have to test D and E at this point. So since D is the first one that is still remaining for us to test, plug and chug time. We're just going to plug it right in and see what works. So answer choice D tells us that team 1 is composed of L in front, Q in the middle, and G in the back. And we can actually eliminate this immediately since it violates rule 1 on its face. G must show up in front if we use it at all, and D, of course, proposes that G is in the rear. So that was easier than we thought. E is our answer. We don't actually have to do anything further because D is technically another rule elimination that we could have done on the last slide if we wanted to, but again, that's not a natural, organic representation of what I would actually do. I wouldn't have even looked at D. I would have started by looking for the Q middle requirement, getting rid of A through C, and then only looking at D, at which point it became obvious that D in and of itself violates another rule. So E is clearly our answer. But in the event you want to check it, we can actually do that on the following few slides. So if we are trying to verify that E indeed could be true about team number 1, we're just going to plug in answer choice E as it is and see if it works out. So E puts L in the front, Q in the middle, and N in the back for team 1. So plugging that in, our table would now look like this. The 2 blue letters, H and Q, to remind you, are from the question stem. That's why they're in blue. And the 2 letters that we put in red, L and N, on team 1 are from the answer choice. So that's just my shorthand visual denotation of where this information is coming from. So again, H and Q was stuff that came from the question stem. L and N are the things that come from the answer choice. And again, given that this is a could be true question, the table of power tells us all we need to do is find a single way to make this work. We don't have to prove that it always works. Just one way to make this work is enough, and we'll be all good. So right now, if we have H, L, N, and Q in our table, the unused 3 letters that we have are G, K, and P. So let's just start right up with G and see if we can place that anywhere. Turns out we actually can't use G because if G shows up, we need to put it in front, and in our diagram, we have no room left for that. So G is out of the list, so we are stuck using K and P, and so we only have 2 letters left and 2 slots to put them in. How convenient. So we have to do that. So to consider where we're going to put K, Rule 2 tells us, interestingly, that if we use K, it has to go in a middle slot. And Rule 4 is the other thing to look at when it comes to K, but since N is already on a full team, team 1 is already full, and there's no way for us to put K or P in there, that's fine. So K and P can both be put in diagram 2, or our full diagram as follows in team 2. So like I said, since we are stuck using K and P, anytime we want to use K, it has to show up in middle slot. So putting K on team 2 means put K on team 2 and in the middle slot. And then of course the only entity that we have left to work with is P. We'd have to put it in the rear slot. A quick rundown of the rules tells us that this is kosher. So rule number 1, of course, was that anytime H or G shows up, it is in front. We only have H and it is in front, so that's fine. Rule 2, I believe, was the one about K, and we've done that. Rule 3, which places L on team 1 whenever it shows up, is already accounted for. And you kind of get the point. We did the rest of the rules in the picture. You can go back and check all of them again, but this only, a quick rundown of all the rules will confirm that this is possible. It's a viable picture. So we have confirmed that E, in fact, could be true. It is a viable possibility. So pushing bravely into question 22. This is quasi-open-ended, but it is restricted to Team 1, so it might not be quite as bad as it looks on its face. So question 22 asks us merely what could be true about team number 1. So given that it is open-ended and doesn't give us any information to plug into the diagram, we are going to go right to stage 3. There's nothing that we can plug in for stage 1, and accordingly there are no possibilities for us to test on stage 3. And so, again, kind of like the question 20 rule checker, the answer choices here are all just about team 1, but as we've seen, many of the rules have crossover effects into team 2 and whatnot. So there's a good chance we'll have to take that into consideration as we work. But yeah, that's just something to keep in mind. The other thing to keep in mind as we push into our stage 3 analysis is that we could try to save ourselves some work with easy eliminations, because if we don't do any pre-eliminations, we will end up testing possibly 4 out of the 5 answer choices. That could be cumbersome, but given how the rules are, and given that we could just get unlucky and maybe not have any eliminations based on half of a diagram, I'm not really getting my hopes up. Maybe 1 elimination if we're lucky, but it's possible that we'll have none. But running through them real quick. Rule 1 doesn't eliminate anything for us because every time we see G, it is in the front position as rule number 1 demands. So rule number 1 so far on its face doesn't get rid of anything. Rule number 2, every time we see K, it is in a middle position. So rule number 2 doesn't get rid of anything for us. Rule number 3, similarly nothing. Every time we see L, it is in team 1. So there's nothing to eliminate based on just rule 3 on its face. Rule number 4 similarly gives us nothing. Every time we see P or K, they are not with N, so they are not in violation of rule 4. Rule number 5 is our first lucky strike. This one eliminates D because it places P and Q on the same team, so D is out. And rule number 6, similarly to most of the other rules, doesn't give us anything. Since we are looking only at team 1, on their face, as far as I can tell with no effort, none of the answers gives us a direct view of H being on team 2, potentially in violation of Q not being in this team 1 middle slot. So again, maybe if we dug further and tried possibilities at this stage, we would find something, but right now on its face, rule 6 doesn't do anything either, so the only one we can get rid of easily is D based on rule 5. So given that this is a could-be-true question that is open-ended, the table of power of course tells us that all we need to do is for answer choices that we are interested in testing out, we just plug in that answer choice as it is with no modifications, and we're going to see if that works. So we'll start right up with A, which proposes that team 1 looks like G in front, K in the middle, L in the back. So rule 1 has me thinking about both G and H. So far, according to our answer choice, G is fine because it is in the front, but we can't actually use H in team 2 because we'd have to put Q in team 1 in the middle to pull that off. But since Q is not going to be able to take that spot, the answer choice puts K there. Since Q can't go into that spot, that means we are not eligible to use H in team 2. Because again, if we wanted to use H in team 2, we would have to put Q in the middle on spot 1, but we can't do that here in this scenario. So that's out. So if we take H out of the running and we consider what we have left, we initially had 4 entities out of the 7 remaining after using G, K, and L. But if we remove H from the list of available entities to use, we actually only have 3. We have N, P, and Q left. And this is a problem because P can never be on the same team with N or Q. We don't even need positional data. We just know, based on rules 4 and 5, that P can't be on the same team as N and P cannot be on the same team as Q. But if we have only N, P, and Q left and only 3 slots left to fill, that means N, P, and Q have to be on the same team if we want to use them all, and that's a direct violation of rules 4 and 5. So we get to eliminate answer choice A. It doesn't work. There's no way for us to make it work. Moving right along to B. B proposes that team 1 looks like G in front, K in the middle, and P in the back. Rule 1 again has me concerned about H, and again like last time, it looks like we cannot use H in team 2 for the same reason. We have something else already occupying the middle slot on team 1, and in order to use, if we wanted to use H on team 2, we have to put Q in team 1, but again, we have no place to do that, so we can't actually use H in team 2. And so without H as one of the entities that we can use to fill the now empty team 2, our 3 remaining entities are just L, N, and Q. Now this is a problem because of rule 3. L isn't allowed to show up on team 2. Whenever we use L, Rule 3 tells us that we have to put L on team 1, but of course there's this answer choice doesn't allow for L to be on team 1, so we have to eliminate B based on Rule 3. So pushing right along into answer choice C, C proposes that team 1 looks like L in front, K in the middle, and Q in the back, and I'm starting to get, deja vu again. Rule 1 has me concerned again about H, because H being in front is something that I'm thinking of, and if we want to do that, we would have to put H in team 2, and since we have no place to put Q in team 1, just like A and B, this again disqualifies us from using H in team 2. So without being able to use H, the only 3 entities we have remaining to populate team 2 are G, N, and P. And again, this is a problem because P cannot be with N as per Rule 4, so we have to eliminate C. So again, the same mechanics are at play in C as they were in A and B. Not having Q in the middle of team 1 really begins to cut into the entities that we have available for team 2, because Q being out of place there disqualifies H from showing up, and then that leaves us with only 3 entities, which means that if we have 3 spots and 3 entities, we have to use all 3 of those entities, and 2 of them, P and N, can't play nice with each other, so that's why we get rid of C. So if you are keeping track of our work so far, we actually eliminated D very early on because of a rule-based elimination, and then we have just pretty efficiently eliminated A, B, and C. So we could just pick E here and be finished, but in the spirit of doing more of this, we'll actually go on and test a few things out. So while this is technically unnecessary because we have gotten rid of D and also A, B, and C, we don't need to do this, but for the sake of doing it, let's just test out E just to confirm that it's true. E proposes that the team 1 composition is Q in the front, L in the middle, and N in the back. Rule 1, again, getting deja vu, same old PTSD again, about H. We're seeing that Q is not in that middle 1 position, so that disqualifies H from appearing in team 2 at all. And again, if we get rid of H, that restricts us quite a bit, because without H, the only 3 remaining entities we have are G, K, and P. But this one might have some potential. We'll start with G, see if we can plug in G, and we can, it seems. We can put G up front, and after that, because there are no positional restrictions on K and P, it looks like we can just throw, well, I mean, there is a restriction on K. K does have to be in the middle, so we can just do G up front, K in the middle, and P in the back, and this looks like a complete picture. So we can do another quick rule check, but just for the sake of not making this video's runtime too long, I will let you do that. But a quick rule check will show that this does indeed fail to violate any rules, so it is a viable possibility. So we have just confirmed that E is our answer for 22. Pushing into question 23. If G is on team 1, what could be true about team 1? So given that we do have a piece of information to work with here from the stem, we will start with the stage 1 of analysis. So if we, as the question stem states, put G on team 1, it does have to go into the front slot according to rule number 1. So again, anytime we use G, rule number 1 mandates that it goes to the front slot. So when we put G on team 1 and incorporate it into our diagram, we do have to do it in this manner. And based on this alone, while I am not seeing anything super obvious that follows from this alone, I am having PTSD flashbacks from question 22, where we repeatedly ran into the same problems with Q's availability and H's availability, but we'll talk about that in stage 2 shortly. But for now, because I don't see anything super obvious that I can actually draw out, I'm done with stage 1. There's nothing that I want to say must be true based on this alone. So forging ahead into stage 2 of question 23. Question 22 was also about team 1, and as we saw in question 22, there were a lot of problems when we didn't have a place to put Q properly. And then if we didn't have a place to put Q on team 1's middle slot, that kicked H out of the running for team 2. And the consequence of not having H available was that we were often left members of that PKN group stuck as the only candidates for being on team 2. And that's problematic because of rule 4, which tells us that those entities can't really play nice with each other. Furthermore, that was further compounded by not being able to separate P and Q sometimes, thanks to rule number 5. So yeah, there's also an issue with L. If we don't leave room for L on team 1, it can't be placed at all, meaning that we're already down one option when it comes to filling team 2. So Q leads to a lot of bad consequences, and L is kind of an outstanding consequence because we know that it always has to go on team 1. So being able to work with Q and L somehow on team 1 was something that gave us a lot more options. Not being able to work with Q and L on team 1 restricted our options. So that leads me to think that if we could just place Q in the middle on team 1, that gives us the option of using H on team 2, which would kind of relieve that pressure on us when it comes to trying to avoid mingling P, K, and N, because those don't really play nice with each other. And furthermore, it would be even better if we could place L on team 1 as well, because L is quite restricted. Anytime we do use L, we know it has to be on team 1. So that would give us, if we put L on team 1, that would give us even more flexibility to kind of juggle around like a full 5 entities for team 2, and that may give us options when it comes to avoiding the forbidden combinations like PQ and PKN and all that kind of stuff. And so hilariously, well, and hilarious to me, because the exam rarely these days seems to reward this kind of thinking, but just based on, it's like, man, I don't know that it has to be the case, but it would just be really nice if Q was in the middle on team 1 and if L was already on team 1. E suggests that L and Q are people to put on team 1, so that's going to be my first instinct. I actually want to try that out because that's exactly what I was feeling. Like it would just be nice if Q was middle on team 1 and L was on team 1. That just leaves us more options to work with. So this kind of goes back to the room to succeed concept. Doing those two things would give us the most room to succeed. It sure would be nice if the exam gave us that combination, and lo and behold, they actually do for E. So I'm just going to try that out. So again, remembering that question 23 was if we put G on team 1, what could be true about the rest of team 1? We are now going to try out answer choice E directly because, like I said on the last slide, I figured it would just be nice and convenient for me if Q was on team 1 as well as L being on team 1. So I am going to plug that right in this manner, putting Q from the answer choice in team 1's middle slot and L on team 1's rear slot, because that gives us the option to retain using H on team 2. So unlike question 22, since we have gone ahead and placed Q in team 1 on the middle slot, we still have H on the board. H is the possibility. So our options now for team 2 really are everybody else. So we have to use 3 among the 4 remaining H, K, N, and P. I do want to avoid using N because that would boot out both K and P, and if so, we'd be stuck using H and N, but we wouldn't have anybody to put into the rest of team 2 because N disqualifies K and P from showing up. So if we take out N from consideration, because that would make it impossible for us to finish, we're left with just H, K, and P. So again, putting GQL in team 1 like so leaves us H, K, N, and P to populate the rest of team 2. And among those 4, we do have to use 3 of them. But if we use N, that disqualifies us from using both K and P, cutting our options down to 2, and that wouldn't allow us to finish the team. So that means that we can't actually use N. So all we are stuck with are H, K, and P. And literally I'm going to put them into the board in that order because Rule 1 tells us H, if it shows up, has to be in the front slot. So if we're going to use H on team 2, it's got to go in front. And that's safe because Q is in the middle slot of team 1, so that satisfies that rule as well. K, whenever it shows up, has to be in a mid slot, so that's another rule, right? So I throw K in the middle, and then I throw P in the back, and we do another quick rule check. And again, normally, if I felt like I had more time, I would go through all 6 rules again real quickly, but since you have them, and I don't want to make the runtime of this video too long, I'm just going to let you do that. But suffice it to say that a quick rule check would confirm this in fact is possible. So it confirms that E could be true based on what we just read. So this sort of shortcutty approach was heavily based on a bunch of insights that we got from testing answer choices fairly extensively on question 22. And it also was based on something of lucky guess. I just prefer the idea of having Q in the right spot and having L in team 1 because that left us more freedom to work with team 2. But even if you didn't get all those insights, you can still kind of grind out a solution here without the help of that information. So let's see what that looks like here. So if you didn't have my same level of PTSD from question 22 and you weren't able to, just out of pure luck and preference, gravitate towards the Q and L situation, we would be in stage 3 basically with an almost empty diagram at this point. We would have no deductive shortcuts, so we would ideally want to start with some quick eliminations before heading right into the grind. So again, because question 22 was a bit of a work-intensive nightmare, so I would probably be feeling some time pressure if this were a testing situation. And my stage 1 and 2 work for question 23 in this imaginary scenario wasn't so great. I didn't have that Q and L insight. I didn't have a whole bunch of stuff in my back pocket about how not being able to place Q in the right spot restricts us from using H, and that really restricts us from filling team 2 easily. My first instinct would be to try to go for at least one easy elimination before hitting the true grind of testing all these answer choices. So looking through the answer choices, A is our first victim to eliminate because A attempts to place G, H, and N all on the same team. And this is a problem with our very first rule, rule number 1, which says that whenever we use G and H, anytime those letters show up, they have to be in the front slot. So if we put them on the same team, by default, we can't put both of them in the front slot on that team. So it's not going to work. That makes us eliminate A. Looking further down the list of answers, I don't really see any other obvious eliminations, so at this point I would be heading directly into the grind to now test answer choices B through E. So trying out answer choice B, and remember this is a could be true question, so the table of power tells us all you have to do to check answer choice B is to plug in B just as it is, as it's written, no alterations, no alternatives. Plug it in as it is and just try to get it to work even once. If we can do that, it's what we're looking for. So looking at B, that gives us K and L. Rule 2 forces K into a mid slot, so if we want to plug in answer choice B, this is what it would have to look like. K would go in the middle and L would end up in the rear. So on that basis, I am at this point now getting very strong question 22 PTSD because not having Q in the middle on team 1 boots H from consideration for team 2. So our options for team 2 are currently down to N, P, and Q. And this is a problem. This is all wrong because Rule 4 forbids us from using N and P together, and Rule 5 makes P and Q a forbidden combination. So there's just no way for us to get B to work. So again, if we wanted to plug in both K and L into Team 1 for question 23, our picture would have to look like this, G, K, and L in Team 1. And then because of the way Team 1 looks, of the 4 remaining entities that we have, we actually get rid of one of them, H, because if we wanted to use H, we would have to have Q show up in Team 1 in a particular spot, and we can't do that anymore. So that does pull H out of the running, and that leaves us with just N, P, and Q to work with. All 3 of those would have to find a way into Team 2, and rules number 4 and 5 make that physically impossible. We just can't put those 3 things together. There are too many rules that forbid that. So B is not possible, and it is therefore not a could be true response, and it is not what we are looking for. So we are now moving on to C. C proposes that K and P are in the rest of Team 1. So Rule 2 again forces K into a mid slot, so if we put K on Team 1, it would have to go there, and P would be bringing up the rear. So again, there's all this drama with Q not being in the middle slot of Team 1. That means that H cannot be used in the front slot of Team 2, and that restricts our options to L, N, and Q. So we did manage to avoid the K and P drama that we've been seeing in other questions, but that would leave us with the unenviable task of trying to use L on Team 2, because again, if we're down to L, N, and Q, and we have to use all 3 on Team 2 in this situation to finish it out, but L, of course, according to Rule 3, cannot be on Team 2. If we're using L, it has to be on Team 1, so we also eliminate C. So even without the being able to see Q and L as something to gravitate towards, just trying out K and P and going down the list of rules, we always run into the H2 Q1 mid rule. So that would always bring us back to this situation where not being able to use H restricts the entities that we can use for Team 2 to L, N, and Q, and Rule 3 doesn't allow us to use N on Team 2. Or doesn't allow us to use L on Team 2. So that's why C doesn't work. So this brings us to D, and remember, we are doing this with the presumption that we didn't have any insight to guess that it would have been really nice to work with stuff here. So moving into L and N, there are no restrictions on position for either L or N, so I'm just going to throw them in there mindlessly with no regard to middle or rear. So yeah, I'm just going to plug them in like this. And again, we run into the same old Q1 middle. Not being able to do that makes us not be able to use H. And so it's going to pare down our options for team 2 again, as we've seen. So our options for team 2 are currently down to K, P, and Q. And we have the same old problem that we've seen in a lot of other situations where if we have to use K, P, and Q on the same team, that's never going to work because Rule 5 directly bans us from putting P and Q on the same team. So we eliminate D. So at this point, we've eliminated A via the rules and B, C, and D via testing. So you'd be safe to pick E. But in case you weren't convinced, we could still try E just as we did it a couple slides back. But because we did E a couple slides back to confirm, I'm not going to reproduce it here. But in the hypothetical situation where, again, you didn't have that insight about E and you were just going from front to back, eliminate A via the rules and B, C, and D via testing, and you wanted to test E, we would do it the exact same way. Just plug in E as it is, fill in the rest of the picture based on fulfilling the rules, and you'll find that it checks out. So we have, by some small miracle, reached the final question of this relatively difficult game. And this final question is, if G is on Team 1 and K is on Team 2, what must be true about Team 2's rear position? So this is a must be true, which could typically be a fairly difficult situation if it were an open-ended question, but they give us quite a bit to start with. They give us 2 letters, and not only that, because of the various rules, we know more than G is just on Team 1, and we know more than K is just on Team 2. We actually have positional data for those 2 as well. So we'll start right up with stage 1 since the question stem is generous enough to give us some information. So let's see what that looks like. So if we're using G, Rule 1 tells us that G also has to be in front position, so we'd put G in front position of Team 1. And then if we're using K on Team 2, Rule 2 tells us that anytime K shows up, K is in the middle position, so we'd put K on the middle position of Team 2. So now we have 4 blanks, and at this point we have H, L, N, P, and Q left to work with after having used G and K. And so my brain is kind of going to the point where we have to end up using 4 out of those 5 to fill out the rest of the diagram. So just about all of them. But we've seen so many times now that our options get severely limited based on whether or not we can use H. Because H gives us a little bit of breathing room when we can use it on Team 2, because that'll allow us to separate K, N, P, and Q from each other as necessary. So that's something that is just in the back of my mind after having seen it so many times in all the answer choices of every question that we've done so far. So based on the importance of being able to use H in Team 2 to give us some flexibility, I'm actually going to head into stage 2 with the idea of pursuing 2 basic branching possibilities. So the first possibility is going to be using H, which would give us the flexibility that I so crave, and the second possibility is not using H, which would restrict the available pool of entities to choose from and increase the risk of us running afoul of one of the various rules that prevent us from putting P and Q together, P and K and N and all that stuff. So yeah, that's where my brain is going first. So moving right along to stage 2, and again, like I said on the previous slide, the first possibility that I want to test is, can we pull this off with H, being able to use H in Team 2? So if we're using H on Team 2, it means, according to rule number 1, that it's also in the front position of Team 2, so that's why H is where it is. And then, of course, using H on Team 2 invokes the rule that we see about Q being on Team 1's middle position. So again, H being on Team 2 is enough to force Q into Team 1's middle position. And at this point, to fill these last 2 spots, we have 3 entities left to work with, L, N, and P. If we want to use L, the only place we can go at this point is in the Team 1 rear spot, because again, L, according to the rules, can only go into Team 1. So if we wanted to use L, it has to go there. If we wanted to use N, it also has to go in Team 1's rear spot because we can't have K and N share a team, so N would be kicked out to Team 1 if we wanted to use it. And finally, when we get to entity P, which is our third and final option for filling in these 2 blank spots, this is the one that can go in Team 2, and in fact it has to go there because Q is in Team 1, so P has to go in Team 2. So let's think about this for a second. We only had 3 letters left to fill these 2 blanks, L, N, and P. Of those 3 letters, we really only had 1 option for filling in the Team 2 rear spot. The other 2, L and N, aren't available for that job, so P, by default, has to be the one to pick up the slack and go into that rear spot. So what we've just found out is that in our first possibility at least, it must be true that P is in the back slot. So that might be enough to just select P, which is answer choice D. But for safety's sake, because I know that there is at least one other potential possibility out there, I'm going to check the possibility that doesn't use H on team 2. So continuing our stage 2 work, we are now testing the possibility that doesn't use H. So we again start with the diagram that the question stem gives us, which is G is on team 1 and K is on team 2 in their respective rule-based positions. But not using H here means that of the 4 slots that we have left, we don't actually have 5 letters left to use. We are down to 4. Because if we decide not to use H, that's the possibility that we're testing here, we are down to L, N, P, and Q. So again, this is pretty handy for us because we know we have 4 slots and only 4 things to fill them with, so we need to use every single one of those remaining letters among L, N, P, and Q. And furthermore, even though I don't know for sure yet, N, P, and Q really don't play that nice with each other. So there are some restrictions that probably lead to very limited outcomes based on the entities that we have left. So let's look at them in order from front to back. Starting with L. If we want to use L, it has to go into team 1 according to rule 3. If we are to use N, it has to go into team 1 because of rule 4. K puts the question puts K in team 2, so N can't go there anymore. When we use P, it has to go into team 2, again because of rule 4. We just figured out that N has to go into team 1 because of K. So P would have to go into team 2 because P and K P and N can't share a team. And then finally that leaves us with our 4th entity, which is Q. Where can Q even go at this point? L and N have already taken the available team 1 slot, so there's no room in team 1. But to make things worse, P is already taking one of the team 2 slots based on what we just found out. So that prevents us from placing Q in team 2. So we just found out that there's no room left in team 1, and Q is disqualified from being in team 2 because of the rule that prevents it from being on the same team with P. So really, it turns out that without using H, if we don't want to use H, we need to fit Q somewhere, but we actually can't. So this possibility doesn't even work. Again, the only way to complete the G in team 1 and K in team 2 scenario proposed by the question is to use the entity H. But as we found out, that forces P to go into team 2 rear, which is answer choice D, as we just saw earlier. So again, because we're kind of methodically figuring out, okay, what do we have left? If we're not using H, because that's the possibility that we're testing, if we're not using H, we only have L, N, P, and Q, and then there are restrictions on L, there are restrictions on N that force both of those to go into team 1, so that means there's no more room left in team 1. And so P, because of that and because of other rule considerations, has to go into team 2. And then based on that, because that's really the only way that we know we can fill out this possibility, that leaves us with Q last, and we'd have to put Q somewhere in team 2 because of space reasons, but that violates a rule, so we can't do that. So what that means again is that the non-H possibility that we just tested isn't viable. That doesn't work. So what that means is that the only possibility that really existed was the one where H was in fact used on team 2, and that one possibility that did work forces P to go into the rear position, and that's exactly what answer choice D indicates here. So a concern that I know that a lot of students have with this kind of procedure is that, what if you didn't see the H or non-H breakdown? Because again, that came from my personal sort of PTSD allergy to having run so many times in that same scenario where it really kind of sucked to not have Q in team 1's middle position. And that really restricted us from using H on team 2, and I saw in all of our previous work that was an important thing. But what if you ran into that, but you just weren't able to take that with you into question 24? The good news is that even if you didn't have that specific sort of H versus non-H possibility breakdown in mind, a stage 3 analysis that combines rule eliminations plus the table of power can lead us home to the right answer each and every time. And that's exactly what I'll demonstrate here at the cost of inflating this video's runtime. But as promised, barreling right into stage 3. Again, if I were doing this on test day, given how onerous this game has been so far, this is the last question of the game, but it was tough. There was a lot of work and there was a lot of thinking, and there were more moving parts than we are comfortable with, right? So given how onerous it was so far, we would again hold on to the hope that to get an easy elimination, or hopefully more based on rules alone, would be a nice thing to have before resorting to diagramming. So that's another habit that I'd like you guys to get into, is whenever you are heading into a difficult or challenging situation, save yourself some work. Sure, you can eliminate all 4 wrong answers just by purely doing plug and chug, but that's really not the most efficient way to do it. That's really the whole plug and chug table of power. It's best described as the nuclear option, the failsafe. If you have absolutely no other insights, you've poured blood, sweat, and tears into this game or this scenario, and you've done the work correctly, but you just, because of your, either you're scared, or you're pressed for time, or you're in a hurry, or or maybe this is the last section of your exam, you're just exhausted, and you're not bringing these insights with you into the following questions. It's still easy to remember, hey, let's just check for quick rule eliminations. It doesn't take that much time to do rule eliminations, but the real strength of it is you don't have to have any particular insight. If you just get into the habit of checking for quick rule-based eliminations, that's going to help you, and you don't have to do any special thought. You just have to remember to do it. So with that in mind, let's start right up with our list of rules. Rule 1 handily eliminates A immediately. The question, again, is asking who can go into Team 2's rear spot. And Rule 1 tells us that H always has to take a front spot when used, but A proposes that H is going into the back, and that's just a direct violation of Rule 1. So Rule 1 gets rid of A. Rule 3, in turn, eliminates B immediately. Again, the question is asking who can go into the rear spot of Team 2, but Rule 3 tells us that L always has to be on Team 1 when it's used, but B is proposing that it shows up on Team 2, and that, of course, is a direct violation of Rule 3. I don't think there's anything further to say about Rule 3, so we'll head into Rule 4. And Rule 4 for us eliminates C immediately, because again, the question is asking who can go into the Team 2's rear spot, but K is already in Team 2, and Rule 4 tells us that N can't go where K is, so if you put N on Team 2's rear spot, that's a direct violation of Rule number 4. So that's it for rule-based eliminations. I don't think we get any mileage out of Rules 5 and 6, but hey, that's not bad. Getting 3 out of the 5 possibilities killed immediately does save us a ton of testing, so that's always a good thing. So since the rules very helpfully got rid of A, B, C, and D, the first thing that we really have to test according to the table of power is answer choice D. So again, starting off with the sort of baseline diagram that question 24's information forces us to use, which is G on Team 1, K on Team 2 in their respective positions. This is a must-be true question, and the table of power says that we should insert an alternative to D, and that's how we're going to figure out if D either must be true or if we can deviate from it. So again, we're plugging in an alternative to see if we can deviate from D, and if we can successfully deviate from D, that means that it is not the case that D must be true, which means that that's not the answer that we are looking for. So at first glance, just based on this mostly empty table, it might appear that we have a lot of alternatives to putting P in the Team 2 rear spot, but actually we don't. We only have Q as an alternative. So how did I get to that point? Well, let's break that down here in this next bullet point. So the base game starts off with G, H, K, L, N, P, and Q. That's all 7 of them, right? But the stem, of course, already placed G and K into the diagram. So that leaves us with just H, L, N, P, and Q, those 5 entities, to fill in the 4 remaining slots. So again, starting from the base game that uses nothing, the stem uses 2 of them, and that leaves 5 remaining, H, L, N, P, and Q. And our rule-based eliminations got rid of A, B, C, and D, which were respectively H, L, and N. So really, that leaves us with just P and Q as the 2 possible candidates for the Team 2 rear spot. Because again, after the question stem, again, no deduction on your part, after the question stem removed G and K from the list of possible entities to fill in the rest of the table with, our rule-based eliminations, by getting rid of A through C, also got rid of H, L, and N from that remaining list, and the only 2 remaining are P and Q. So therefore, the only alternative to D, which is to place P in the Team 2 rear spot, is to try placing Q in the Team 2 rear spot. Again, that is our only viable alternative based on all the work that we've done. So just as we found out on the previous slide, since we are testing D in a must-be-true situation, and the only way to do that is to plug in an alternative to D, and in turn, the only alternative to D is to place Q in Team Two's rear spot. That's exactly what we'll do to test this out now. So that is what we are getting. G on Team 1 in the front spot, K on Team 2 in the middle spot, and those G and K are placed by the question itself. And Q is now our chosen alternative that we are trying to see. If we can get away with putting Q there, then we know that we can eliminate D. So to fill in the remaining 3 slots, the letters that we have left are H, L, N, and P. But we have to remove H from the list of available, since the only way to place H in Team 2, the only way to place H, according to Rule 1, is to put it in the front of Team 2. But the requirement for being able to use H in that manner on Team 2 is to have Q in the middle of Team 1, according to Rule 6. But the problem is we have Q as our alternative in a different spot. We have it on Team 2 in the rear. So there's no way for us to fulfill the conditions that allow us to use H on Team 2. So H is now out of the running when it comes to Team 2 spots, and H could never be in Team 1 anyway because G is already in the front slot in Team 1. So H is just out of the running now. So we have 3 letters left, L, N, and P, and we have to use L, N, and P at this point if we want to finish out the diagram, because again, we have 3 spots left after plugging in our alternative that we are interested in testing out. And we only have 3 letters left to use, because we originally had H, L, N, and P, but H can't be used because there's no place to put it on 1, and we are not allowed to place it on Team 2 because of our usage of Q. So to place L, N, and P, we'll just start with L. To use L, it has to go into Team 1, that's what Rule 3 tells us. To use N, it has to go into Team 1 because the question stem placed K in Team 2, and Rule 4 prevents us from putting N anywhere in Team 2 because K is already there. So again, N has to go in Team 1 according to Rule 4. And finally, to use our last letter, P, it must also go in Team 1. And this is because of Rule 5. The only way to have an alternative to P was to put Q on Team 2 in the rear. And Rule 5 prevents us from having P and Q on the same team. So P can't go on Team 2. It would have to go on Team 1. But we have a problem. Of the 3 letters that we have, none of them are eligible to go into Team 2. But according to this picture, we have to find a way to put one of them in Team 2. But we can't do it. They all have very clear rule-based reasons why they can't go into Team 2. So it turns out that this actually isn't a viable diagram. We can't finish it. And so since this was the one alternative we had left to avoid putting P in Team 2's rear spot, that means it is unavoidable to put P in Team 2's rear spot. Therefore, it must be true that P2 in this situation goes into Team 2's rear spot, meaning that D, in fact, is the correct answer. It must be true that P goes into Team 2's rear spot on this one. So yeah, that was quite a bit of work overall for this game, and this is something that I was hoping I would be able to change from the last demonstration. I did want to lean a little bit more heavily and demonstrate a more full Ooga Booga sort of stage 3 only analysis, where you literally gained no insights from previous questions and all you were doing is grinding out answer choices. I still hold very much to my position, born through experience, that it is possible to finish a section in the standard 35 minutes doing that pure Ooga Booga approach, but it was quite stressful for me when I tried it multiple times. It's replicable, I can do it, but the risk of me missing something is much higher because things felt a little bit rushed, and it's just not smart. It's not something that I can responsibly teach. There's some value maybe in demonstrating that it's feasible, but I still don't want to teach that method because I really do want people to see that as just one of many tools to use. It's just something that I want to put out there because if you happen to be lost, all you need to do is adhere to the table of power and you will get an answer. But I do not want to give any implication that immediately resorting to a pure stage 3 pure table of power analysis is the way to go, because it's not, especially for a challenging game like this where it really does help to build that sensitivity. So it was hard for me to code it into each and every diagram to start with, but this is what I'm talking about when I want people to get a sense of the rules and how they interact. Even though it was hard for me to draw out that possibility each and every time, I was just uncomfortable anytime Q was not in a convenient spot for us, because that disqualifies us from using H in Team 2, and disqualifying us from using H was very restrictive because that really heightened the risk of us needing to rely on N, P, Q, and K, and those all have restrictions. They can't, all those can't go on teams with each other under certain conditions. So not having the freedom to use H if and when we wanted to really cut down our options and really ran us closer to the risk of not being able to finish diagrams. And so it really is important, I think, for a reasonable, viable test day simulation of a game of this grade to be able to develop that sense. And that, to me, is the biggest thing that I try to get people to do when I'm doing one-on-one tutoring with them, is to have them build that sensitivity. Sure, you can't draw it out necessarily. Sure, you can't really put it into a hard-coded form like a deduction, but it's still extremely useful, and perhaps more useful than deduction because it's extremely flexible. You don't have to draw it out to know that it's going to matter. I'm still considering trying it for the next in this series of a more purely Ooga Booga approach, but I also don't feel like making like a 3-hour video on what is not a 3-hour process. Again, it's one of those things where it doesn't actually take nearly as long to do as it takes as long to explain, but because I would be doing so much diagramming and grinding, the slides would get extremely dense, my explanations would get really long, and the runtime for this is already more than long enough, but it would just be even further inflated. So I'm still up in the air. Leave a comment or any feedback if you'd actually still like to see that for a full game, but be prepared for a very long video in that case. And as always, thanks for making it this far. Time to pander to the algorithm. Please do like and subscribe to help the channel. That helps me reach more people and provide more free quality, difficult LG practice and other subjects to more people, and that's kind of the goal of this. Leaving a comment also helps me with general feedback. Again, I am pretty new to content creation, so any little bit helps. There are no wrong opinions. There are bad questions, but there are no wrong opinions really. And of course, if you have any further inquiries or questions, specific questions about anything that I've done here, here's my email address. It's also available on the sort of about me/contact section of the channel, so you can find it there as well. And finally, if you do need practice material, I do highly recommend using LSAC official materials because those are the real deal. Using one of the affiliate links that I provided not only is going to help you more efficiently find the material because it's not that well organized on Amazon, and it also would help me to continue to do this, make this channel a self-sustaining enterprise. So again, thank you.